There's a little song that we sing in our movement down in the South. I don't know if you've heard it, but it has become the theme song. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. Deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome. Though I've joined hands so often with students and others behind jail bars singing it, we shall overcome. Sometimes we've had tears in our eyes when we joined together to sing it, but we still decided to sing it. We shall overcome. No, before this victory is won, some will have to get thrown in jail some more, but we shall overcome. Don't worry about us. Before the victory is won, some of us will lose jobs, but we shall overcome.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. It is a joy to see one and all, and blessing to be able to gather together. Let's go ahead and get underway, shall we, with an opening prayer. The Lord be with you. Let us pray. Almighty God, by the hand of Moses, your servant, you led your people out of slavery and made them free at last. Grant that your church, following the example of your prophet Martin Luther King Jr., may resist oppression in the name of your love and may strive to secure for all your children the blessed liberty of the gospel of Jesus Christ, who lives and reigns with you and the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen.
Amen.
Pray for our nation, that you would stir up your Holy Spirit in and around every resident, calling us into the light of love and truth and righteousness. Grant our elected leaders the courage, wisdom, and perspective they need to work for the good of all people and for the preservation of the ideals of equality, justice, and democracy we hold sacred. Grant protection and peace to our President-elect Joe Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris as transition and leadership takes place. Give every resident a heart to understand the role you have given your creation to reflect your love and be instruments of the reconciliation this nation so desperately needs. This we pray through our Lord and Savior, Jesus the Christ. Amen. This morning, we are delighted to have 4 panelists, one of whom will serve as the moderator for the session today. Our moderator is the Right Reverend Shannon MacVean-Brown. She is the 11th Bishop of the Episcopal Diocese of Vermont. Prior to her election, Bishop Shannon was serving as interim rector of St. Thomas Episcopal Church in Franklin, Indiana. It's a rural congregation committed to radical welcome and service to the community. Bishop Shannon is committed to social justice work in the church and the community, as I'm sure you'll see as this conversation unfolds. Thank you for joining us, Bishop Shannon, and we also thank God for the privilege of having such a diverse body before us. We also have on our panel the Right Reverend Jardine Bruce, who is the 7th Bishop Suffragan of the Episcopal Diocese of Los Angeles and the first woman to be elected bishop in diocesan history. She was ordained to the episcopate in May of 2010. Bishop Bruce's areas of specialization include new community ministry, that's formerly known as multicultural ministries, stewardship and oversight of the congregation congregations in the southern and northern area of the diocese. I believe she told us she is celebrating her 23rd year of ordination this day. So we applaud her for that. And also for the fact that she's a Platinum Life member of UBE and a frequent visitor to our Talk to Talk sessions. We welcome you back, Bishop Bruce. Joining us also is the Right Reverend Deon Johnson, a familiar face to the UBE family. He hails from a small village on the Caribbean island of Barbados, where his faith was formed under the watchful eye of his maternal grandmother. Bishop Dion was ordained as the 11th Bishop of the Episcopal Diocese of Missouri on June 13th in 2020. He has served most recently as rector of St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Brighton, Michigan, prior to his election and call to the episcopacy. A life member and former chief liturgist for UBE, Bishop Dion brings to the table deep experience in social justice issues and ministry to gay and lesbian communities. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. And our last panelist, who is therefore the first, according to the biblical account, is the Right Reverend Phoebe Rolfe. She's a lifelong Episcopalian, a faithful supporter and member of UBE, and she grew up in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. She earned degrees from Harvard College, the Princeton School of Public and International Affairs, and the University of Arkansas, Little Rock School of Law, before she clerked for 2 years for the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit in New Orleans. I'm sorry, I meant Nolens. In Nolens, and working as an associate focused on commercial real estate. She attended Virginia Theological Seminary and currently serves as the seminary's vice chair of the Board of Trustees. Bishop Roaf came to Memphis from Richmond, Virginia, where she served as rector of St. Philip's Episcopal Church. She is both the first woman and the first African-American to lead the diocese. We are overjoyed to have this gathering of Episcopal leadership with us today, reflecting on the questions that our moderator, Bishop Shannon, will lead in the conversation that is about to fold. I now turn our conversation over to Bishop Shannon MacVean-Brown.
Good afternoon. It's good to be together with you all and to reflect and discuss together things that are very important for our times. I want to start with, one of my favorite quotes from the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. from when he accepted the Nobel Peace Prize. And he said, "I have the audacity to believe that people everywhere can have 3 meals a day for their bodies, education and culture for their minds, and dignity, equality, and freedom for their spirits." A wonderful preacher he was, and he left with us many powerful sayings that inspire and compel us to fight and join in this struggle for racial justice and equality. And so my colleagues, I'd like to hear from you. Can you share a saying or an encounter that holds special significance to you in relationship to Martin Luther King Jr. with us today? And I don't know who wants to go first. Bishop Phoebe is unmuted, so why don't you go first?
Okay. I will. So one of the quotes that Dr. King said, it was written in his letter from a Birmingham jail in 1963, that has really struck me in these days that we find ourselves in now, is, and I quote, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly." And it seems as though we're in a time in our nation when, rural folks feel like they've got their own issues and they're not connected with urban folks. And urban folks think they have their problems that have nothing to do with rural folks. So if we can't, as a nation, understand that we're all in this together, we're not going to get very far. So I'm just really mindful that I'm tied to everybody, including the folks that I don't agree with, including the folks that would even doubt my humanity. I'm still tied to them. And so how can I live into that in ways that would be pleasing to Christ?
So my favorite saying comes from his sermon at the National Cathedral, Remaining Awake Through a Great Revolution. We must all learn to live together as brothers, or we will all perish together as fools. And for me, the power of that is that sense of deep mutuality. But what needs to happen before any of that can happen, or before we can really be who we are called to be by Martin Luther King, by Jesus Christ, is that we have to speak the truth and we have to teach the truth, which means unwhitewashing our history and really being able to speak openly and honestly about what has been done in this country. Our history is totally whitewashed, and I use that term deliberately. And we have to take that off. We have to take that veneer off and really have an honest conversation about what's happened and what has been done to groups of people, especially our Black brothers and sisters. It's imperatively important now.
Yeah, I'll jump in. One of my favorite quotes of his is when he mentioned, we all may have come to this country on different ships, but we're all in the same boat. And it's a reminder also for us as faithful Christians that we get painted with the same brush as other forms of Christianity, whether we like it or not. It's also a reminder that, the events happening in our nation belong to all of us. I mean, I would echo what Bishop Diane was saying, in that we're in this together, whether we like it or not. The challenge is, how do we manage to, I'm not even sure if reconcile is the word, but how do we bridge the gap between these seemingly polar opposites that's happening in our nation? And that I think is the ultimate question. I mean, it's the realization, like Dr. King said, we are in the same boat. The problem is, I don't think most of us, and I mean us with a capital U, most of us don't know we're in the same boat. The challenge is making folks to recognize that we're all in this together.
I thank you all. One of the things that I just noticed about all the quotes that we brought up, but there's this common thread of really upholding just our common humanity, and that we're people. I mean, and that I think is where we're obviously struggling as a nation. And, we have, just to let everyone else know, I've got a lot of things I want us to talk about, and we could talk on any of these for a really long time. And if you have questions or things that you want to add to the discussion later, we'll get to that. So please be sure to put your thoughts, questions, or whatever in the chat box. And hopefully we won't run out all the time with what we want to say, and have you all get a chance to speak as well. As I think of how King's call to attend to the pervasive problem of poverty, his call was a challenge to the status quo, and then also to the status of the Black middle class, and so he got, he stirred up the water in so many ways, even amongst, some people that thought, this, I've gotten myself, I've made it to a particular place. And he wasn't satisfied with us just sort of being settled with just fitting into the rest of society. And that's when he began to get a little pushback, not just a little, a lot of pushback. I think that's why, why he was assassinated, because he began to push this idea of beloved community that also dealt with things like poverty. And so as he sought to launch the Poor People's Campaign, he got pushback from people that looked like him and people that weren't like him. And so I'm wondering if I could hear from you all, if we could talk some about that. What do you feel is the greatest threat today to the realization of MLK Jr.'s vision of beloved community?
I'll jump in. The very first thing that comes to my mind is a short 4-letter word, fear. it's great and easy to fear the other, and somehow think that there's not enough of whatever it is. I mean, that's almost how capitalism works. It works on fear of scarcity, and fear that there's not going to be enough of, there are not going to be enough jobs, there's not going to be enough money, there's not going to be enough resources if I give something out to you. The realization that we have enough, and enough for everybody to be happy and healthy and whole. And yet fear is what drives us. I mean, fear, I mean, we look back at January 6th, that wasn't vitriol. That was the desperate attempts of fearful people, who were in the grips, I think, of that. I almost said monster, but you might as well call it a monster, the monster of fear, because fear will make you do things that logic and love would tell you otherwise. So I think the biggest threat to that beloved community right now is a deep sense of fear.
Well, I'll piggyback after Dion, Bishop Dion, and I think it really goes to Bishop Diane's comments for me. Part of the reason there's so much fear is there's been so much misinformation. I think that beyond just people being, it's almost, I don't want to say, well, on some people's part, maybe a willful ignorance, but on other people's part, people have been intentionally misled. So how can we actually get the facts out there? As long as different segments of our community are basically being sold a pack of lies, it will be difficult for us to ever come together to create the beloved community. And so I wonder, as the church, not only the Church Universal, but as the Episcopal Church, what role can we play in helping to bridge these divides and get some correct information out there, speaking the truth in love?
And I agree wholeheartedly with both my brother and sister Bishop. I think for me too, with all of this, there's two things. Number one, none of us fully living into practicing God's economy, which is the more you give, the more you share, the more you have. We've been so drilled to take that we don't understand the concept of sharing. And there's, God gives us more than enough to share. But somehow we've been instilled with this deep fear, like, I earned it, it's mine. No, it's a gift from God, and it's a gift that we're supposed to share. That's number one. Number two, I hold great hope in the work of our presiding bishop, especially his new work, From Many One, Conversations Across Difference. I think if we could start having these conversations one-on-one, to try to educate who we are, who we are, where we are, what do we love, what is moving us, what is driving us. I think if we can start having those conversations, we can start breaking down some of these barriers that have been created through the gross representation of our own history. I think that has to happen. The scariest thing of this current president's only how many more days time in office was when he was trying to rewrite all of the history books. That's when the history books are already false, but to make them more false, that's very scary to me. That's not the story that I want my 2-year-old grandson, who turns 2-year-old today, that's not the story I want him to hear.
Thank you all. This is not part of what we said we were going to discuss, but I just have to say this. So in my diocese, I've already said it, some of you heard me, there's like 5 Black Episcopalians, and I'm one of those. And one of the things that I discovered when I came here, and I could have figured that out, I'm not sure why I didn't, was that the first Bishop of Vermont, who was also the presiding bishop as the Civil War was coming to a close, and when he's the one that orchestrated the Episcopal Church staying together. And he wrote a book called The Historical, Ecclesiastical, and Biblical Case for Slavery. Now, mind you, he wasn't elected because it didn't work that way in those days. He wasn't elected presiding bishop. It was because of his seniority, and it was his turn. And so one thing that I found is for people in my diocese who have been here before me, they didn't know this history. And they wondered, why didn't I know this? And then we're also very much aware of the fact that we are on the unceded land of Native Americans that came before us. So that's been a lot of our conversation. And I've listened to a scholar and a pastor, and he's also Native American. His name is Mark Charles. You should look him up. And he has gives some talks about just how the doctrine of discovery is so intertwined with our understanding of ourselves as Christians and the ways that people have been able to justify what they've done, what they haven't done. And so all of these things are connected. And so we've been doing a lot of researching and painful reading for almost 6 weeks now of this. It's a bunch of lies. But because and then now people are like, well, what? 2 weeks in, they're like, I don't know what to do with this. And Mark Charles talks about the fact that as a nation, we have these problems because we don't know what to do with our history. And it's there. And I think that part of that work, I know that is our work as the church. And that when we fail to do it, then that has fed into where we are now. And again, back to King now. One of the things that I talked about this morning when I preached was, and King was talking about the Emancipation Proclamation and the idea of freedom. And this quote that I'm going to read to you comes from the March Towards Freedom, which was when he spoke in Detroit, my hometown. And it was the precursor to the I Have a Dream speech. And when he spoke, he said, but now more than ever, America is forced to grapple with this problem. For the shape of the world today does not afford us the luxury of an anemic democracy. The price that this nation must pay for the continued oppression and exploitation of the Negro or any other minority group is a price of its own destruction. For the hour is late. The clock of destiny is ticking out, and we must act now before it is too late. And so, it's always heartening to hear others in leadership and others thinking along the same lines. And so I'm hopeful that we've all talked about this notion of our history needing to be understood and faced and not whitewashed to help us understand these fears that have animated a lot of how we've operated in the institutions of our society. Which brings me to the next thing I want us to talk about is, since the attempted coup, that's what I'm going to call it. That's what the presiding bishop called it. And I've been thinking a lot about the last book that King wrote before his assassination, his book, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community? And I've been wondering, how do we move forward from here? And so I'm wondering if you all can share your thoughts on what ways might the recent happenings in our nation's capital have helped or hindered our efforts to achieve God's beloved community? And then also, what do you think Martin would say? And what do you believe God is calling us as a church to say, or maybe even not to say? That's a lot of questions, but whichever part you want to tackle. Not all at once.
I'll start by saying that I think the events of January the 6th, in a way, help us to realize just how significant and deep the problems are. And anytime there is a sickness or a disease the first step in any sort of plan for recovery is a diagnosis and a treatment. And I have to say, I never ever in my life thought that I would see armed rioters go to the United States Capitol in such a disrespectful fashion. So it's really given me a sense of how much work there has to be done before we can actually accomplish the beloved community. And in a sense, this is information that can be helpful. I think we can no longer minimize or pretend that this is not a significant problem. You know, even with the election results and how close it was, you know, how many millions of people voted for both President-elect Biden and President Trump, there's still a difference to me between a person who votes Republican and someone who is willing to storm the United States Capitol. So I think it's really given me a sense of just how big this thing is that we are confronting.
I think, to quote the great theologian Dave Chappelle, this was America's wake up. I honestly think that the storming of the Capitol actually may have moved the conversation and moved the needle further forward, because there was a segment of folks who were on the sideline saying this is not that bad. And I think that this exposed once and for all that the emperor has no clothes on. That this is not just talk, that it's not just rhetoric. And so I think that it was the beginning of some truth telling about America, because one of the interesting things that I found in listening to the reporting is that they compared January 6th to 1812, which is the last time that the Capitol was raided. And it was raided by British forces, trying to take it back to being part of a colony, which is an interesting parallel, because what it does is it re-exposes, as Bishop Diane was saying, the whitewashing of the history. What we saw on display, you can't whitewash what we saw. You can't try to undo what actually happened. I mean, I saw on Facebook and saw other social media that, you know, what would have happened if that was a Black Lives Matter protest that had stormed the Capitol? How different would the response have been? If that was Dreamers, Hispanic Latino Dreamers that stormed the Capitol, how different would that have been? But what I think, because it was Trump supporters, because I think that it was people who were willing to take somewhat the law into their own hands, it took us back to a place where it's like, this is real. The lies and the rhetoric have real world consequences. I mean, 5 people lost their lives. And so it's a reminder that the work is hard, but sometimes the first step in this work is just simply naming it and seeing it for what it is. And I think that we had to see it for what it was, because there was no place of escaping what we saw January 6th.
And I would just add, you know, sitting here watching the events on January 6th, I was praying and shaking at the same time, because what I kept on thinking about was, if that was a black face or a brown face storming the Capitol, instead of being let out the doors, there would have been body bags lined up. And that's the disconnect for us that was exposed on January 6th. The disconnect that has to be addressed in order for we as a society, we as followers of Jesus, to move forward. What was surprising to me this morning when I opened up my iPad to start looking at the news was the woman who wanted who got arrested for you know, storming the Capitol and wanted Trump to pardon her. It's like, how does that work? Somebody has to explain to me how that works, because it doesn't make any sense. Other than they felt compelled to do that because they were egged on by a president that has no control and who is the king of putting out false information and building false histories. So for us as a church, we need to be the place where people can hear the truth in love, to experience forgiveness and grace, to talk honestly with each other about a history that has yet to be completely unfolded, not only for the Black community, but for the brown community, for our Asian brothers and sisters. There's lots of pockets of these untruths that have kept on being replicated through time, that we need as a church to be that voice that's crying out in the wilderness. There's a better way. There's a way to be honest, and there's a way to move forward. And we can do that together. Jesus promised it. Martin Luther King Jr. promised it, saw it. We have to work to make it happen.
Thank you all. You know, and the other thing that has been occurring to me, because one of the difficult pieces of all this is, you know, it has, you know, loosened some people's tongues and refusal to you know, their insistence on whitewashing is falling away because of what they saw. And yet there are still some people that are claiming, well, no, it wasn't rioters, white rioters, those were Antifa, or those were, you know, they were incited by Black Lives Matter. It's like, as if to tell us, you didn't see what you saw, but we know what we saw. And, you know, one of the things that I admire about Episcopalians is that we have a big tent, but we also have entertained a whole lot of foolishness. And, you know, giving weight to things that are not, you know, I don't even want to say that they're not true, but entertaining, you know, sides to things, sides as if some things actually deserve that place. And, you know, there comes a time when we have to be really clear about certain things. And I've been talking with people about this recently. Well, you know, people were claiming at the Capitol that they love Jesus, or that they were there because of their faith. And, you know, again, so I'm getting back to this being our work. And I've seen that, you know, perhaps we need to do a little bit more biblical literacy. And, you know, we talk about people claiming to be there because of Jesus, and standing on like maybe single issues like abortion, you know, or, you know, supporting life as it were, but condoning things like capital punishment and things like that. But, you know, scripture is pretty, you know, it's clear. There's a few things that Jesus said that really give us a true sense of what is true and what is not when it comes to how to walk the way of love. And you know, King, as people joined him in his work and at demonstrations, they had a rule of life. They weren't just, you know, let's show up for, you know, for the thing, and, you know, we'll stand and march and sing a few songs together. But no, people had a really clear rule of life that they were to follow in order to be prepared for the work of justice. And one of the things that stands out to me most in his rule of life was that daily study the life and teachings of Jesus. So I just know that after the things that happened at the Capitol, I know people in this diocese, you know, are even more committed to studying Jesus's teachings and his life, and also participating in faith practices that lead to a Jesus-centered life, prayer and fasting and giving and all of those things. So anyway, I just thank you all. And I know that we're getting closer to our time, so I hate to bring up this last thing, but I really want to. Okay, thank you. All right. So, you know, King gave his I Have a Dream speech in August of 1963. And it has been a long time since he shared his dream. which we have certainly yet to achieve. And yet I believe it is a dream that we should continue to strive for. And if his dream is worthy of our efforts, what do we tell our children and younger generations in the face of what seems like a preponderance of evidence that we have not made much progress in the last, it's like 53 to 58 years. I can't believe it's been that long since he shared his dream and since he was taken from us. And so, why should Black and brown bodies believe that there will be change?
Can I, the greatest thing that has given me hope that we can show our young people that things can change and things will change and things are changing are the number of women bishops. This is just me, the number of women bishops we now have, and especially the growing number of bishops of color in our church. We are slowly becoming and reflecting the beloved community that King talks about, our presiding bishop talks about. The most recent elections, and the three of you are I have never celebrated so much as when the three of you got elected. And we keep on having this great reflection now as a church, in our church, of this changing population. This is an outward and visible sign of an inward and spiritual grace, I think, of us really starting to move forward. It's your voices in the church that's going to make things not only change for the church, but for our communities and our society. And I am so very, very grateful for all of you, because we need you to tell your truth. We need to hear your truth. We need to stop whitewashing our history, and start reflecting who God has made the United States to be. And anyway, I'm off my soapbox.
I would just say that for me, the thing to tell children in the younger generation is their voices count. They can be the change that we need, and to remind them that when you go back and look at other significant movements in our nation's history, it was young folks who led the way. Dr. King was 26 years old when he led the bus boycott in Montgomery, which is just to be so young and to have responsibility for that. And when you look at the folks who were the Freedom Riders integrating bus stations and lunch counters at Woolworths and other places, those were 19, 20, 21-year-old kids, high school kids and college kids. So, scripture talks about children sometimes leading the adults. So I think for me, the thing that I want to say to the younger generation is we need you. And if you're fully in, things are going to change. I've got a lot of gray in my hair now. So, my time really is sort of in the rearview mirror at this point, but our young folks are the ones that can really push us forward.
Yeah, I would echo what Bishop Diane and Bishop Phoebe said, that I don't think we need to point our young folks in any direction. I think they're the ones pointing us in the direction. If you look at the Black Lives Matter protest, if you look at some of the racial protests that have happened across the country, it's not the elders that are out there. It's the young folks who are pushing for it, and they're pushing for it based on King's dream of nonviolent protests. They're the ones out in the street getting arrested and protesting. They're the ones organizing. I've been reading all kinds of stories about people who are organizing communes so that they can spread wealth and buying up property in different neighborhoods so that they can revitalize. They're the ones who are trying to make that a real and present thing, not just in the past, but now. And I think for the church, I think we are called to look back to where we came from. You know, Presiding Bishop Curry talks about look to the rock from which you were hewn, that we look back to scripture. I think that this time is a lot like the Babylonian captivity. It was long, it was hard, but in the end, you know, God's people won out. And as King said, you know, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And in a sense, we have to help it bend a little bit. And for the church, it means we have to tell the truth. We have to tell the truth of our own work and the shortcomings and the places where the church has fallen woefully short in its call towards justice.
Thanks. Yeah, and I will, you know, one thing I will add is that, yeah, we have so much to learn from our young people, and they also want to know that we're with them and that we're standing with them, and they want us to tell the truth about these things, and also to live the truth about being Christian, whether they decide to follow in our path and follow Jesus themselves. They know when we're not. And that's why, you know, some of them choose not to be. I mean, my daughter, she has her own issues with Christianity, but she says that these people that claim to follow Jesus, that they're not. And she knows the difference. And they want to see that from us. And, you know, to not be so worried about all, you know, the things that have distracted us so long about, you know, smaller church size and all these other things that get us nervous and preoccupied. I don't know, if anything, where all of our energy should go is towards, you know, being beloved community in whatever way we can, and learn from them, learn how to use TikTok, encourage them, learn how to use all these things and these methods that they're using to actually to make a difference and to approach this work in ways that we wouldn't necessarily. You know, it won't hurt us. It'll make us live longer if we learn some of these new things.
If I may, my 10-year-old came to me last year, and said she was afraid I might get lynched. And I've never considered myself a political person, but I felt really ashamed because I wasn't involved. Let's see, I'm a businessman, and so I spent more of my time thinking about making sure my people had jobs and not about anything else. And so working with her, we decided in order to get involved, whether that was organizing marches, whether that was putting out a social media campaign, let's see. And yeah, the thought that my 10-year-old was afraid every time I left my house that something could happen to me, it really, and forgive my French guys, pissed me off. And to your point about TikTok and everything, yeah, she told me that Facebook was for old people, and she helped take our social media campaign to the next level with TikTok and a whole bunch of stuff.
How do we best connect young people outside the church to the Episcopal Church in this work? And I'm happy to answer the question. A big part of it is preach Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what I've found is that most of our young people don't want to hear about social theory and all that stuff in church. They want to know about Jesus. Barna, back in 2017, did a study of millennials and asked them about Christianity. And they asked, when you hear the word Christian, what's the first word that comes to mind? And the number one was judgmental.
Mm.
The words loving, faithful, or Christ-centered never even made the list. And so, but when you ask them, what is the number one thing that they want to know about? Their number one answer is they want to know more about who Jesus was and why his teachings matter. So preach Jesus would be the short answer.
Okay, great.
We do have a question
And
from, I'm sorry.
can I add to that really quick? So, Vermont is a really unchurched state. And so, like, I don't even say, I preach the sermon. I talk about, so, our holy books, we read them, and then I have to come up with some sort of a speech that's around that. That's how I explain the sermon. I can't just say a sermon. People don't know what that is. And I meet with young people from our school. It's a high school. And I just, they just want to know, they know what I do, sort of. They know I'm the bishop. And so we just have these conversations, and they have conversations about life, just life. And what do I think about it? And they're like, what? What, Christians believe that? And they don't question once the love of Jesus when I talk about it. They are ready to hear that. They're like, oh, okay, Christianity is a good thing. Just like one conversation. I don't have to prove anything to them, just talking the truth with them, and they're open to it.
Thanks, Bishop. You do have a question from Reverend Eric out in California. How to preach peace to people who do not want peace, and how to preach peace to a congregation for whom peace is a one-way conversation.
Keep preaching it. I mean, I don't know. Maybe that's not the best answer. I mean, I don't know what else to do.
I think you have to model it. I think it's more than just preaching it. It's something that you have to model. Like being able to sit with somebody who has diametrically opposed opinions to you, who, and we all have people like that in our lives. When they open their mouths, you kind of cringe, but you can't cringe. You need to stay engaged and listen, and then tell your truth. And when you can do that and come from a place of love, that's how hearts start to get changed. And that's how when you go to preach, they can start to hear you, because they know you're not just dismissing them. You're not just dismissing them because they don't think the same way as you, that you're trying to engage with them and bring them along. Preaching the gospel, Jesus's gospel of love, is really empowering. It's also really hard, because people are so used to hearing another message, a different message, a message of siloing, of disinclusion. But that's not what Jesus said. And we have to take back that message and live it and preach it. Because if we don't live it, if we try to preach it, it falls on deaf ears, because it's not true. It's that embodying Jesus in the way we live our lives, in the things that we do, in the preaching that we have. That I think is what is going to change the world.
And I also think, being transparent about the places where you struggle about some of those things, where you find difficulty, and allowing people to acknowledge their struggles with being nonviolent, for example, and how it's hard, and allowing that to be out in the open and held in a sacred and safe space, when people aren't, putting up a barrier and feeling like they're just not meeting a certain standard and trying to push it away because they're struggling with it.
Another question.
I think we have to make sure we distinguish between peace and being comfortable. Most of our folks want to be comfortable in church. They don't necessarily want peace, because let's look at Isaiah. The prophet of peace is often the one that is pushed back against the most, because it's telling the truth. And I think in a lot of times, we as the church, we can abdicate our moral voice we can abdicate it in order to try to continue to be comfortable. And you had mentioned a while ago, Bishop Shannon, about declining numbers in churches and all that stuff. And I think a big part of that comes from us wanting to just be comfortable, rather than engaging with some of the hard social justice places where the church has always been. I mean, one of the things that drives me crazy is I look at the Black Lives Matter movement. There is not a religious component of it. The church is silent and absent. I mean, we are part of the protest and whatnot, but if you look at the leadership, the church has no or very little role in the leading of these movements. And to me, it says something about where our moral voice has gone. We have gone so far that we want to be more comfortable than to find our moral voice.
Yeah, let me just tag on to what Bishop Dion said. There's a real difference between being unsafe and uncomfortable. And I don't think that any person should ever be put in a situation where they are unsafe, physically, emotionally, psychologically. But if we are going to move this ball forward, all of us are going to have to be uncomfortable. So one of the things that I'm trying to work on is to focus on, like, is Phoebe's internal posture right? You know, am I getting enough sleep and eating well in terms of a healthy diet and exercising and seeing my therapist and seeing my spiritual director, so that as I move into these very uncomfortable conversations, I don't immediately become defensive or respond in a hateful way, even when I'm the recipient of that. I find that when I'm healthy and I can have be present in a way that people can hear, that's a much better possibility for me to make a connection than if it's sort of a tit for tat kind of thing.
Okay, I'm told we have time for one more question. Question comes down to how do we keep the barriers of ordination process? It's always been this way, to keep Jesus followers engaged, and hopefully that system works for them. Sierra?
I can clarify.
Sierra, yeah.
I am a young person who has been called to ministry my entire life, and my gut reaction just now is to say I'm like having a hard time living into the church system. Jesus, that's my guy. But like the Episcopal Church has broken me over the past year. How, and I know I'm not the only one, because I have most of my life revolves around the church in some way. And so, what's the point of me staying if I can also go to Black Lives Matter and being engaged and have that position of following Jesus's life and teaching, if I can't do it in the church?
I think your voice.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think the church needs your voice now more than ever. Because I think it's those voices that push the church to be better than it thinks it can be. It's a little bit of what I was talking about, being comfortable. It's comfortable to just rely on, well, this is just the system. It's another when you actually have to change the system. My bishop colleagues in here know quite well that when you first become bishop and you have to make changes, there's always significant pushback, because that's how things have been. And the church likes comfortable. We love to be comfortable. And it's uncomfortability that often moves the church forward. I mean, think of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. When he was preaching and teaching and doing his things, 70%, if I remember correctly, about 70% of the Black churches were not behind him. They did not support the push that he really wanted to make in civil rights. And it wasn't until he started having some success that more Black leaders joined him. But for the most part, you know, he did not have the support, but he stuck with what he saw as the moral call of the gospel to do the work that he is supposed to do. I would suggest the same thing for you. Call the church to be better than it is.
I want to say something too. You know, first of all, I'm sorry that you felt like an outsider, and what I'm thinking is your own church. And And I can't believe that I'm sitting here, as a bishop saying that, yeah, I've had that same experience. And I've had thoughts of, why am I in this church? Why? What is my place when it doesn't seem like it necessarily wants me? And I don't know exactly a perfect answer, but I do know that part of my own discernment and the reason how I ended up staying in the church is, wrestling with what it felt like to be an outsider and being able to use that experience and that part of, how I identify myself as my ministry in the church. And I can't, this would take days and hours to talk about, really. But that did help me to begin to find a way to speak and to push that made me not always feel so defeated. So please don't leave the church, even though we may not deserve you, please don't leave. Let's keep pushing back. We need that. We need your voice.
And Sister Sierra, I certainly hope you can hear the hearts and our longing for you to stick with it and make sure that we honor your voice. I'm going to cut in now because we also want to honor our time segment now. I'm going to invite Deacon Guy Lemus to come forward and to share with us any special announcements he has.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. It's wonderful to be with all you. Thank you to all of the wisdom of our bishops. So happy and proud of you all. Keep doing the good work that Jesus has called us to do. And we also want to acknowledge the people whose shoulders we stand on. As Lester said, the wisdom of the elders, and we want to acknowledge some of the people that have made the union strong. Our past presidents are present with us: John Harris, Reverend Canon Sandy Wilson, Canon Annette Buchanan. We have our current board members and officers: Deacon Linda Wilson, Deacon Clive Sane, Lois Jackson Aisha, Matopi Johnston, our second vice president, Reverend Dr. Wilmot Merchant, Miss Carrie Brown, and Roxanne our regional, and we also have Lynn Collins. And I hope I haven't forgotten anybody. But we just want to acknowledge you all and thank you for continuing to help us grow and develop the union. And it's such a rich and rich on right now. I have to say to the young lady as well, I was where you were, and I broke down and cried in my CPE with my director, and I said, I feel like I've made a terrible mistake. I feel like I am in the wrong place, and I'm joining a church that doesn't give a hoot about me. And so I want to tell you what he said to me. And what he said was, this is exactly why you're here, and never again. And if you look at the people and the faces of the bishops and the gender of the bishops and the orientation of the bishops on the call, God is already talking to us. So don't be concerned with the past. Focus on the present, because we're called into the present and the future. And I believe that God is calling you. So we'll give you a big hug from California. And please know, don't let it break you, because we come from a strong tradition, and people, we've been through a lot worse. Don't let ordination scare you. You will make it through, and we're going to pray for you.
Amen. Thank you very much, Deacon Guy. Thank you to each and every one of our panelists. We have spectacular, outstanding leadership in our episcopacy, and we're so grateful for your time and your attention and your service to us this day. We gather again on February the 21st for a session dealing with social media and its use during this pandemic, and afterwards to make connection, deeper connection with God's people. And with those words, we ask you to go in peace, to love and serve the Lord.
For the victories won, even some will have to face physical death. But if physical death is the price that some must pay to free their children from a permanent psychological death, then nothing shall be more redemptive. We shall overcome. Before the victory is won, some will be misunderstood and called bad names and dismissed as rabble-rousers and agitators, but we shall overcome. And I'll tell you why. We shall overcome because the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. We shall overcome because Carlyle is right. No lie can live forever. We shall overcome because William Cullen Bryant is right. Truth crushed to earth will rise again. We shall overcome because James Russell Lowell is right. Truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne. Yet that scaffold sways the future. And behind the dim unknown standeth God within the shadow, keeping watch above his own. We shall overcome because the Bible is right. You shall reap what you sow. We shall overcome. Deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome. And with this faith, we will go out and adjourn the councils of despair and bring new light into the dark chambers of pessimism. And we will be able to rise from the fatigue of despair to the buoyancy of hope. And this will be a great America. We will be the participants in making it so. And so as I leave you this evening, I say, walk together, children. Don't you get weary. There's a great camp meeting in the corner.